there, everyone. So I was on YouTube today and I was watching some old reviews for games and stuff like that. Sometimes I like to go through, see other people's opinions. And I came to a weird realization. I came across a video for Zelda 2 and they were talking about how they don't like this and don't like that. And I started getting really annoyed. And I started to realize that whenever I hear people badmouth that game in particular, it always just kind of annoys me. And I think the problem is just that I really like that game. But it's unusual because there are a lot of games that I like that other people don't. And it doesn't really annoy me as much when I hear them talk about it. Like, a lot of the time it depends on what they're talking about. If if the game was very linear and they like something a little more free roaming, stuff like that. Like, if it comes down to things like personal preference, it's it usually doesn't bother me too much. But for some reason, it always annoys me when I hear that about Zelda 2. And I think the problem is that the reasons that they always give don't really ever make any sense to me. They either hate it for things that were not a problem back in the day but are a problem now, or were the norm back in the day. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, I don't feel like there was any reason to really hate the game. I think there were reasons to not like the game. But it started to make me think about just the whole general attitude that people have when it comes to what they consider to be bad games. And I'm wondering if a big part of it is just that it seems to be fun to hate games. Obviously we'd rather play good games as opposed to bad games. Although I really can't say obviously, because there are a lot of people who prefer to play bad games, especially when it comes to YouTube. People tend to rage out more when they don't like the game, and there's a lot more activity, I would say. It's a lot livelier to not like a game than it is to really like a game. When somebody rages out about how much they hate a game, it's usually funnier and more well received than if somebody is just gushing about how much they love a game. Half the time that turns into, okay, we get it, you like the game. And it kind of bothered me, because if you have a legitimate reason, I have trouble believing in someone's full opinion if they tell me that they haven't played it for longer than a half an hour. I feel like the very, 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 very start of the game isn't going to give you an idea of the game. So I think a lot of the time people just hate these games and they don't actually try it. It's just they go into it with this mentality that they're not supposed to like the game. So they end up killing it for themselves before they even start. And it happens in a lot of places. I mean, a lot of the time we watch bad movies or movies that we hear are bad, and we don't ever give it a chance. That kind of that happens all the time. I know there's some pretty crummy movies out there, especially in the comic book genre, where we get these movies that are just panned by critics and panned by the people in the comic community. But then when you actually watch the movie, when you watch it with an open mind, there's something salvageable. We've gotten to the point where I think a lot of it is variety. There's so much stuff out there. Something that ranks a 6 out of 10, we consider to be awful. And the reality is a 6 out of 10 isn't unwatchable. We just take it that way, because it seems funnier to just attack these movies, these video games, all of that stuff. I talked about the reasons that people don't like it. And it's, one of the reasons I always hear is it's difficult. It's an extremely difficult game. It's not really that difficult if you are patient with the game. That's one thing that happened, in the old days. There were plenty of very, very difficult games. I mean, you have games like Battletoads that were notorious for their difficulty. But Battletoads was a prime example of a game that was hard for the wrong reason. The controls in that game were kind of terrible. So that made the game a lot harder. The game is not actually unplayable, but the controls are, they add a level of difficulty that really shouldn't be there to a game. I thought Zelda 2 had great controls. I thought it was nice and stiff. There was a little bit of floatiness here and there, but nothing horrible, nothing like if you ever played Super Mario 2, I thought that game was way worse when it came to the controls. But I thought it was difficult for the right reasons. The enemies were difficult, but they were not unbeatable. You just had to know how to beat them. The areas to get through were difficult, but if you took your time, if you were very patient, if you timed your jumps correctly, it was not that tricky. I mean, I hear people talk about the palaces where they're basically like Medusa heads. They do the up and down sort of sideways S pattern, I guess you would say. That's a basic pattern. If you're constantly getting hit by it, you're messing up the timing. You need to really pay attention a little bit more and time it a little bit more. Don't get it wrong. There were things that could have been fixed. I didn't like the overhead. I didn't like when you go outside and then you have to avoid the monsters and it turns into a more of the side-scrolling sort of combat system. And that was another thing. People didn't like the side-scrolling, but we'll get to that because I have a big problem with that. I have a problem with people who have a problem with that. But I felt like the overhead areas should have been like Zelda 1. I think you should have gone outside of the buildings, and as far as a map goes, then it's more of an active action sequence. You swing your sword, you kill the enemies. You can't use spells or anything like that. That's where you add more to the side scrolling to the bulk of the game by giving it everything and then by having the overhead parts be minimal. You go outside and you swing your sword. You can't use any of your spells. You have to fight the enemy. You could have the enemy still randomly appear, but you have to fight them. And that's how you travel from place to place. That would have made more sense to me. Again, it wasn't a game breaker, but I just feel like there was a better way to do it. I also would have appreciated more storyline inside the game. I think that's something that we've gotten used to now. So that's definitely a very, very far afterthought, which again, I'm going to get into in the next point. But I would have liked to have seen a little bit more story. I feel like there was more story to be told, given that we were townspeople and you were interacting with a lot of people. I feel like something like a cutscene, to transition, give us storyline elements. I just feel like that would have been a little more helpful. It would have added a little more flesh to the game. Now, one of the biggest problems that people have is that it strays from the Zelda formula. I can't stand that argument. I think that argument is ridiculous. For the simple fact that there was only one game before it. What formula was there? They make it sound like all these Zelda games. That's an argument that you hear a lot nowadays. Where, oh, well, it's not really like any of the other Zelda games. Yeah, but this is an argument that people used to use when the game first came out. So all you had to compare it to was the first one. Yes, it wasn't the first one, but it was the second one. It was its own game. And if you're gonna try anything different, it's gonna be early on. That's your best bet, because if nowadays we got a side-scrolling Zelda game, then I would think that's a little odd, considering we haven't had a game like that in forever. Or, I mean, if Zelda 2 never happened and we got a side-scroller now, it would have never happened. Then it would have made more sense to say, whoa, why are you changing up the formula like this? Then it would have made a lot more sense to not accept it, as easily. I still think you should have tried the game and then decided whether or not you liked it. But to get upset about that, and it's only the second game in the series, is odd to me, and I'll tell you exactly why. There was a Dynasty Warriors. If you're familiar with the Dynasty Warriors franchise, Dynasty Warriors is an action beat 'em up series starting with the Dynasty Warriors 2 on the PlayStation 2. If I remember right, it was a launch game. Dynasty Warriors 1 was a one-on-one fighting game. And in my opinion, I thought it was a very good fighting game. So right off the bat, you have a game that had a system, changed it pretty much completely to a free roaming 3D beat 'em up, and has been that ever since. I don't remember people being furious because it switched to an action beat 'em up. It most likely has to do a lot with the fact that Dynasty Warriors 1 wasn't as well received as Zelda 1. But the idea that it after one game it wasn't allowed to do anything different, just it bothers me, and it boggles my mind. And it's not the only game that's done it. Conker's Bad Fur Day was based off Conker's Pocket Tales, if I remember right, on the Game Boy. That was not a raunchy game. Again, not as hugely received as Zelda 1. Conker's Pocket Tales was sort of, middle of the road kind of game. So Bad Fur Day changed it. They took everything from it other than the name of the character and the fact that he was a squirrel. Changed it completely. And whenever somebody brought up the first game, it was, oh, that was weird that they changed it up so much. And then they continued to love Conker's Bad Fur Day. I'm going to give you one more example here. And this one is kind of, the first two had a good reason that the first games weren't as popular. But here we have this is a weird scenario here. This is Castlevania 2. Castlevania 1, platformer. Massively popular. Everybody played Castlevania 1. Everybody knows the complaints about the bats and the birds and the Medusa heads and everything, because I think most gamers have tried that kind of game, the standard action platform Castlevania game. So then we switched to Castlevania 2, and immediately people, once again, were just furious. It was an adventure game. You had to go to towns, and you had to collect these items to do this and that. You had to go to the 5 mansions and do all of this stuff. And people were really upset. Rightfully so, because the game did have some issues. Without a solid map screen, and the clue system as far as what you had to do was just ridiculous. Not unplayable, just difficult for the wrong reasons. But the fact that it was an adventure game bothered people. And you've only had one game before it, really. I mean, I think there was an arcade version like Haunted Castle, but realistically, we're talking about Nintendo, and there was only one Nintendo game before it, which was Castlevania. So you got people totally furious. The third game went back to the platform style, along, with a little bit of adventure with the side patterns, the side paths and stuff like that. And for the most part, it stayed that way until Dracula X sort of changed it a little bit, with the multiple pathways, but then there was some story elements to it. And then, of course, Symphony of the Night was a massive success, and, we call them Metroidvania games now. But my point is, Castlevania 2, as far as Metroidvania, that's what Castlevania games are now. Pretty much every Castlevania game that comes out, other than the 3D ones, are side-scrolling Metroidvania games that have the same map. They use the same kind of system. You upgrade your weapons and stuff like that. That's what Castlevania 2 was. The only thing that Castlevania 2 was missing was the map that we're all familiar with. And Castlevania 2 was the same as these other games. But it was poorly received because the one before it was so loved, and it took a departure from it, even though there was only one game before it. It seems odd to me to be so attached to something that only had one game. And I feel like it's an unfair way to judge anything, really. If it's been that way for a long time and it tries to change with the formula, I still think you should try it out. Metroid Federation Force. Unfortunately, I'm a huge fan of Metroid, so unfortunately, Metroid Federation Force happened, and was poorly received for certain reasons, mostly because we wanted a canon Metroid game as opposed to what felt like a side quest, a spin-off kind of game. If it didn't have the name Metroid on it, it actually wouldn't have been that bad of a game. But there's other animosity there. There's like I said, the fact that we wanted an actual Metroid series game and we got a spin-off game. That was kind of the problem with that. But ultimately, I picked it up. I tried it. It was a decent game. It just, there were other reasons to not like it, but I still played it. And if somebody asked me what I really, really thought of it, I would give them my opinion of that game and not my opinion based on the fact that I want a Metroid game and I got this instead. And I think that part of it is that we react because, sort of like I touched on earlier, it's fun to not like these games. We love the YouTube videos where they're freaking out about how much they hate games. I worked at a video game store and we would have days where we purposely played the games that looked like they were going to be bad. They had bad covers. We were unfamiliar with the storyline. When a bunch of games come in, and when new games come in and they're $50 and then you get a brand new game and it comes in and it's $20, a lot of the time we attach it to, oh boy, this is going to be bad. This is not going to be a great game. The funny thing is, doing that, we actually found a lot of games that we really liked. I remember one of my favorite stories is a game called Mobile Light Force 2 on the PlayStation, which had this Charlie's Angels looking cover. It just looked ridiculous, and we thought, wow, this has to be a terrible game. $20, I think it was $20 brand new. It was $20 or $30 brand new. We got one copy in, and it sat on the shelf for months. Nobody bought it. So we had we call them bad game days, and that was the point where we were going to play all these awful games. Loved it. It turned out that was a Japanese, like an anime shooter. Forgive me for, I don't know the name. I'll put the name up on the screen. But the game was unbelievable. I think I remember buying it. I think that's the copy that I bought. Actually, no, I'm sorry. One of the other coworkers bought it and we never got another copy in. So I ended up buying my copy a couple years later. But that was a great game. And it would have been, we were going to play it with the idea that we were going to sit there and just make fun of it the whole time. We thought it was going to be some hokey 3D ridiculous adventure with these Charlie's Angels ripoff characters. And it turned out to be something completely different. Which we've also played some bad games that were bad games. There's a game called Time Commando. There was a game called Lucky Luke. We played a game called Roscoe McQueen, which was like a firefighting game. And we played them, I want to say a couple hours each, just because it was fun to make fun of them. It was fun to see how bad they were and listen to the bad audio and the graphics they were trying, you felt kind of bad, but they were trying, but it's fun to rag on some of these games and, just have a good time doing it. When you go on YouTube, it's fun to watch other people just bad mouthing these games and just playing awful games. Playing awful games. But in the end, they're awful to them. So you need to try it. If maybe you want to try it because you want to see how bad the game is. I recommend that you try it and see if there's anything redeemable in the game. I mean, there are some bad games out there with great stories. There are some great games out there with ridiculous stories where the storyline is just stupid and would be better off if it wasn't there. But then the gameplay is actually pretty solid. So that's definitely my recommendation, is to try these games out yourself. If you like, I'll go back to Zelda 2. Give it, I'm sure it's on a virtual console somewhere. There's a couple different ways to play the game. I know that if I remember right, it was released on GBA. I know that there is a collector's disc for the GameCube, but that's a little pricey to be buying just for Zelda 2. I know it was downloadable on the Wii. I don't know about the Wii U. And if you have a Nintendo and you go to a convention, I think it's 10-15 bucks. Give it a shot. And that's basically my point of all of this is to it's fun to hate, it's fun to rage out, but try stuff for yourself. And the funny thing is that goes beyond video games. Movies. If somebody says that a movie's terrible and don't risk the $10 to go to the theaters and see it. $10 plus, snacks. So, you go to the movie theater, you buy a pretzel, you pay $10 for the ticket, you buy a pretzel bite, small popcorn, and a soda. That's $62 right there. So, maybe don't do that. But when it comes out on DVD, when it comes out on Netflix, sit down and watch it. Maybe there's something there that you're going to enjoy. Maybe you can say, hey, the storyline was pretty dumb, but I thought that the action sequences were great. I thought that the special effects were great. And that's maybe enough to carry you to an enjoyment, that other people just refuse to see. And it goes even beyond that. If people talk about doing activities outside, like biking or going to the gym. Going to the gym is very difficult, but I've met people that love it. That when they go to the gym every day, and then if they have some spare time in the evening, they go to the gym again because they like to do that. And yes, it's tiring for other people, and other people see it as such a chore. But yes, some people just like it. So give it a try. Hiking, biking, walking, and jogging. These are things that a lot of the time we attach this sort of negative stigma to. But I would recommend that you try it yourself. To be honest, I'd recommend that you get out there and try and do as many different kinds of things as possible. For this exact reason. For the fact that people love to gripe about the things that are bad in their life. But you might like them. Listen to their concerns. If anything, their concerns might help you. They might not like something because when they started it, they weren't ready for it. If you listen to that and you take that into consideration, you'll be ready for it. So, somebody might have said, oh, I tried to go biking for 10 miles one time and I almost collapsed with starvation from thirst because I didn't know to bring water. Well, now when you first go biking, you'll have a bottle of water with you. Again, it's a little silly, but it's the point is just try and do as much as you can. And if somebody says that they don't like something, take it for what it is, which is their opinion. And then go out and give it a shot. Now for video games, yeah, it's a little risky to go out there and spend $60 on a game. But me personally, that's one of the reasons I love being a retro gamer. I don't normally like horror games, with that horror sort of atmosphere to it. I found Dead Space 1 for $5. So I figured, you know what? $5 is enough for me to say I can give this a shot. And even if I don't like it, I'm not losing too much in $5. But I thought Dead Space 1 was amazing. I ran out and picked up Dead Space 2. And I thought that was very, very good. Unfortunately, it wasn't as good as the first one, but I thought it was a lot better. I do want to play 3. And here we are at the perfect situation. A lot of people that I talked to said they don't like 3. So I've said, why don't you like 3? Well, they went away from the adventuring, and it's a little more actiony. It's not as scary as the first 2. It's a little more action. These are the things that I've heard. I don't have a problem with that. I don't, that's not, if you tell me that you didn't like it because of that, that's one thing. But if you say, it's not worth playing, and then you tell me that, well, that's for you to decide. For you, for me, I just need to know that that's what they changed. And now I go into it knowing that, okay, I'm not going to have a scary time. I'm going to have a more action time. So now I can play it thinking that I'm going to play an action game. I may end up liking that game a lot more than you. Just because I was a little more open-minded to it. So that's basically the bulk of it. Just, try this stuff for yourself. If people complain, take those complaints as opinions, and then see if you want to do something and figure out for yourself whether or not you like it. In my opinion, start with Zelda 2. For no other reason than I think it's a really good game that gets more flack than it deserves. I want to thank you guys for joining me for this little goofy rant. Let me know some things in the comments that some games that you always heard bad things about, but you played it and you actually liked it, or any other activities. Is there an activity that people have told you, don't bother trying, it's no fun? You bothered to try and you really kind of enjoyed it. But thank you guys. Have a good night.